Let me tell you something right now that most folks ain't ready to hear. And when I say this, I want you to let it sink into your bones, because this ain't just a headline. This ain't just some diplomatic talk, it's a turning point in the game. Jaishankar's one word that shattered Trump's India plans. Now you may think one word don't carry weight, but oh no, this ain't that kind of word. This ain't some accidental slip of the tongue. This was deliberate. Calculated, surgical. This was the kind of word that doesn't echo, it detonates. It sent shockwaves across continents, rippled through embassies, and knocked on the doors of every so-called strategist in Washington who thought they had India figured out. See, there's something folks need to understand about Dr. S. Jaishankar. That man don't play chess. He plays *shatranj and baby. That game got rules most folks in the West still trying to Google. This is a man who walks into a room and doesn't need to raise his voice, doesn't need to wave a flag, doesn't even blink too fast. But what he does bring is precision. He speaks like a man who's already 10 moves ahead, who's already predicted your next 5 questions, and already got your rebuttals melting before you can speak them. Now here's Trump. Big guy, swagger, a businessman with a showman's flair, and let's be honest, he had plans for India. Oh, he did. Plans to pull India tighter into the American orbit, to get India on that old Cold War leash, to make India say yes when America wanted it to say yes, and to whisper no only when it suited the West storyline. Trump saw India like a key piece on the board, but he thought he was holding the hand that moved it, and then came that asterisk word, not a sentence. Not a speech, not a press release, just one word from Jaishankar that flipped the table without making a sound, and when that word hit the air, it didn't just stop Trump in his tracks. It made every advisor in the room look at each other like, did he just say that? Yeah, he did. And what makes it worse for them, he meant every syllable of it, because let me tell you something. India in 2025 ain't India in 1991. This ain't the India that waited for Western validation. This ain't the India that asked to sit at the grown-up table. No, this is the India that built its own table. The India that said, we'll bring our own chair, thank you very much. And oh, by the way, we brought food too. So when Trump came to the table thinking he could outshine, outtalk India's foreign minister, what he didn't realize was, he wasn't sitting across from a diplomat. He was sitting across from a strategist, a warrior in a suit. A man trained not just in international relations, but in decoding power itself, so when the cameras were rolling, and Trump tried to make one of those bold declarations about how India and the U.S. were going to do great things together, you could feel it. That tension, that moment where Trump expected an echo chamber, but instead got a surgical strike, and here comes Jaishankar, calm, composed, smiling just enough to make you nervous, and then he dropped it. That one word that made everybody freeze, autonomy, that was it, one word, 7 letters, and a seismic shift in global power dynamics. Because when Jaishankar said autonomy, what he was really saying was, we are not your project, we are not your pawn, we are not some grateful recipient of Western favors, we are India and we make our own decisions. And Trump, he wasn't ready for that. His team wasn't ready for that, because when the U.S. talks about allies, what it often really means is dependence. Countries that lean in, nod politely, and say, yes, sir. But that ain't India's DNA. Not anymore, not in this era, not under this leadership, and certainly not with Jaishankar holding the mic. That one word didn't just mess with Trump's plans. It exposed them. It showed the world that India wasn't looking to be managed. It was looking to lead, to negotiate from strength, to set its own terms, and baby, when a country starts setting its own terms, You best believe the old powers get nervous, let me tell you something. There are moments in history that don't need a battlefield, don't need a parade, don't even need a treaty. They just need one clear voice, one unshakable truth. And that's what Jaishankar brought that day. He stood there and made it clear that India wasn't leaning east, west, north, or south. India was standing tall, centered, rooted, ready. Trump had plans to pull India tighter into a transactional partnership. Trade deals dressed up as diplomacy, military cooperation painted like friendship, but always tilted toward Washington's interests. But that one word, autonomy, flipped it all, because autonomy means we choose our path. It means we don't follow. We walk beside, if and only if it serves both sides. It means you don't get to dictate what's best for us. And that's terrifying to a power that's used to calling the shots and the ripple effect. Oh, it was immediate. You could see it in the shifting tone of U.S. press briefings. You could feel it in the hesitation of American analysts suddenly backpedaling on their predictions. You could hear it in the whispered conversations in diplomatic corridors. Did India just pull away? No, India didn't pull away. India stood its ground and sometimes standing still is the boldest move of all, because let me tell you something about real power. Real power doesn't shout. It doesn't need to dominate. Real power is quiet, unapologetic. It walks into a room and changes the temperature. That's what Jaishankar did with one word, and make no mistake. This wasn't just about Trump. This wasn't just about America. This was a message to the whole world, to China, to Europe, to the Middle East, to Russia. India was saying, we don't do camps. We don't do colonies. We don't play second fiddle. We are not here to dance to your song. We brought our own drum. This is a new era. An India first era, and for some folks that's uncomfortable, because for decades the West got used to an India that was polite, that was careful, that played nice. But now you've got a nation with 4 billion people looking inward for strength, not outward for approval. A nation with missiles in the sky, satellites in space, and a mindset rooted in sovereignty. That's why this moment matters. That's why this speech shook the global order. Because it wasn't a rejection. It was a declaration. A declaration that India doesn't need to be invited to the table. It owns the table. That word, autonomy, was the sword Jaishankar used to slice through decades of subtle pressure, of backroom deals, of friendly manipulation. And the message was clear. India is not for sale. India is not for rent. India is not for lease. India is. And you will deal with us on equal terms or not at all. Trump wasn't ready, but the world. The world was watching, and they saw something that day that went deeper than diplomacy. They saw conviction. They saw sovereignty. They saw a nation whose voice could no longer be filtered through foreign lenses. They saw India not as a rising power, but as a risen one. And let's talk about what happened next. Because the aftermath of that one word, it changed things. U.S. negotiators began coming in with more humility. Military dialogues were suddenly more balanced. Trade talks became less about pushing and more about partnering. Even the media, yes, the same media that once framed India as a developing junior partner, started using new words. Independent power, emerging giant, strategic equal. Why? Because that's the new reality. Because that one word forced the world to rewire its vocabulary. And here's the kicker. That word, autonomy, it wasn't just a geopolitical statement. It was a psychological one. It told the people of India, stand tall. Your nation is not a beggar in global markets. Your country is not a servant in foreign affairs. You are not a backup dancer. You are the main act. You are the light. You are the heat. And the world now orbits you, not the other way around. You see, speeches come and go. Leaders rise and fall, but moments like this, they define eras, they define destinies, they become the stories we tell our children about when the tide changed, and I promise you, this will be one of those stories. Because it wasn't just Jaishankar speaking, it was India finding its full voice, loud enough to be heard, calm enough to be respected, firm enough to be feared, and Trump, he felt it, that sting, that unexpected silence after the word dropped. That realization that the playbook he brought to the table was outdated, because the India he thought he could deal with was gone, and in its place stood a nation that knows its worth, that doesn't negotiate out of desperation, that doesn't bow to pressure, that doesn't chase approval like a trophy. No, this India asterisk commands asterisk respect. And it's getting it, one word at a time, so if you're out there wondering how much power a single word can carry, just remember this. Sometimes a whisper has more impact than a scream. Sometimes silence after a sentence is louder than applause. And sometimes, one man with the right word at the right time can shift the weight of nations. That's what Jaishankar did. That's what India is doing. And that's why Trump's plan, grand as it was, loud as it sounded, decorated in stars and stripes as it may have been, collapsed in the shadow of a single sovereign soul, piercing word autonomy, and from this day forward, that word ain't just a policy. It's a warning, a flag, a new anthem for a nation that will never again play second to anyone, not in economy, not in defense, not in diplomacy, and certainly not in destiny. India has spoken. And the world has no choice but to listen. India used silence and precision, while Trump brought volume and ego. Guess who won? This wasn't just about two men or two ideologies. This was about two entirely different approaches to power, to legacy, and to the future of global leadership. On one side, you had a nation that had spent decades studying the world, growing through its pains, mastering the art of balance, and waiting for its moment, not out of fear, but out of strategy. And on the other side, you had a man whose entire leadership style was built on commanding attention, making deals in boardrooms with bravado, and assuming that power was loud and immediate, but the world had changed, and India had changed with it, quietly, consistently, and decisively. That one word Jaishankar delivered wasn't just clever, it wasn't for show, and it sure wasn't improvised. It was the result of a long, calculated posture India had been refining for years, a posture that didn't need to shout to prove strength, didn't need to pose to be feared, and didn't need to please to be respected. It was the mark of a civilization that had awakened to its potential and was done asking for permission to lead for decades. The global order was built around the assumption that only a few powers could speak loudly, act freely, and demand obedience. And for years, India played along, cautiously, carefully, building its infrastructure, investing in its defense, strengthening its economy, training its leaders, and mastering the language of global diplomacy. But make no mistake, that silence wasn't submission, it was sharpening, and Jaishankar's word, that was the moment the blade left the sheath. Trump, with all his noise, couldn't see it coming. He mistook silence for compliance. He thought loud promises and transactional relationships would keep India tethered to America's orbit. He saw India as a potential asset, a counterweight to China, a defense partner who would fall in line under the right pressure. But what he didn't see was that India had no interest in being anyone's pawn, not even a valued one. That one word shattered that illusion, not through rage, not through rejection, but through absolute clarity, because behind Jaishankar's calm face was the force of 1 billion people who had waited long enough. A population tired of being underestimated, a country tired of being lectured, a nation with deep scars, ancient pride, and a brand, new fire in its chest. And it marked something even deeper. It marked the birth of India's assertive military doctrine, backed by innovation, self-reliance, and relentless vision. India's military strategy for years had been one of defense and diplomacy. It was focused on protecting borders, managing conflict, and maintaining regional balance. But behind the scenes, something else was happening. India wasn't just preparing to defend itself. It was preparing to become a force no one could ignore. It was quietly investing in hypersonic missile technology, artificial intelligence, electronic warfare, and indigenous defense manufacturing. It was building its own GPS system, its own missile shields, its own surveillance networks, its own stealth programs, all under the radar, all under that same silence the world mistook for passivity. So when Jaishankar spoke, it wasn't just a political moment. It was a signal that India's days of hesitating were over, that its new doctrine wouldn't be based on borrowed wisdom or outsourced technology, that it would act, strike, and lead on its own terms. And that silence. That was the sound of engines being built, missiles being calibrated, doctrines being drafted in the offices of Indian military thinkers who knew that the battlefield had changed while Trump was trying to strike deals on old assumptions. India was reshaping its entire security paradigm. While Trump wanted India to join the West's game, India was building a new game altogether. No more dependency on foreign suppliers for arms. No more waiting on other nations' approvals to secure its borders. No more defensive posture disguised as diplomacy. Instead, India launched programs like Atmanirbhar Bharat in defense, DRDO's next-gen weapon systems, and a restructured military leadership that would no longer rely solely on traditional doctrine. It was preparing for the future: cyber warfare, space dominance, drone swarms, autonomous systems, not loudly, not in front of cameras, but with the kind of precision that wins wars before they begin. And that precision wasn't just in weapons, it was in mindset. India had shifted from reaction to initiative, from participation to orchestration. It started conducting surgical strikes across borders, showcasing its ability to hit back without hesitation. It began controlling narratives in international forums. It stopped explaining its actions to nations that didn't understand its challenges. It began defining its own red lines and dared others to cross them. And all of this happened in silence, under the radar of a media obsessed with loud personalities, because India didn't need to prove anything through noise. Its proof was in results. In how it tamed insurgencies at home, stabilized hostile borders, launched advanced satellites in record time, and neutralized threats without headline, hungry campaigns. And Trump, with all his sound and fury, had no counter to that. He brought volume and ego to the table. He brought grandstanding, applause lines, and pressure tactics. But India met it all with stillness, and in that stillness was unstoppable force. The mistake Trump made was assuming that diplomacy was performance. That if he delivered the right sound bites and threw in the right compliments, India would move. But India wasn't moved, because compliments don't change doctrine. Applause doesn't erase history. What India wanted, what it demanded, was respect. And real respect isn't spoken. It's earned, often in the silence between words, so when that one word left Jaishankar's mouth, it was the final confirmation of a truth that had been building for years, that India would no longer allow anyone, no matter how powerful, to define its future. That its military wasn't just a tool of defense. It was now a symbol of deterrence, strategy, and independence. That its foreign policy would be written in New Delhi, not in Washington. And that silence, that calm, unshakable, surgical tone, that was the voice of a nation that had stopped asking and started deciding. This was the moment the global powers finally saw that India was not just rising, it had risen. That its doctrine had evolved from reactive to proactive, from restrained to ready, from please consult us to we will act if needed, and the world's balance of power felt that shift. Because for the first time in decades, a major nation had told a superpower, without theatrics or threats, that it would walk its own path, and it did it not with defiance but with dignity. India's silence was never weakness. It was calibration, a choice to prepare rather than parade, a choice to study rather than shout, a choice to earn strength rather than borrow it, and Trump, who built his image on dominance, had no answer for a nation that didn't need him. He couldn't out-talk that one word. He couldn't negotiate it away, because it wasn't a word, it was a worldview, and India had already committed to it. Now think about what it means when a country says no with a whisper. When it resists pressure not with protest, but with precision. That's a level of maturity, of sovereignty, of internal power that no external pressure can break. That's what makes India's rise not just impressive, but irreversible. And Jaishankar's delivery of that one word, that was the formal declaration that the era of dependency had ended. India didn't need to scream. It didn't need to dramatize. It needed only to make itself clear. And in doing so, it sent a message to every leader watching. That respect is no longer a favor, it's a demand. That cooperation will happen, but only on equal footing. That India's military, political, and economic decisions will come from its own strategic compass, not from any foreign power's playbook. And that silence, it's no longer permission. It's a warning, because in that silence lives the new India. Nation that builds in the background and moves only when the time is right. A nation that listens more than it speaks, prepares more than it reacts, and advances more than it announces. A nation whose doctrine now reflects confidence, not caution. Whose weapons are born not in dependence, but in self-reliance. And whose future is driven not by old alliances, but by bold choices. India brought precision. Trump brought noise, and in the end it was never a contest, because true power doesn't need permission to be respected. It simply becomes undeniable.